Okay. Today, me and Kaylee are going to communicate about communication, and we're also going to talk about the notorious Five Guys story. I know people have been people have been dying to hear that one. But before we get into that, we'll leave it people anticipating a little bit longer. I just want to ask you, Kaylee,
Yes.
kind of about the why. Why communication? Why is it such an important skill to develop?
Oh, so many reasons. I think it is the foundation of any relationship. Any relationship. Doesn't matter what type of relationship it is. If it's the person who delivers your mail or if it's with your boss at work, communication, very important.
Yeah, it really is a foundation. And I was actually reading this book called Sapiens. It's like the history of humankind.
Mm-hmm.
And in that book, they were talking about how communication and the ability for people to talk with each other in detail is actually one of the major things that allowed us to become like the dominant being on the planet. Like, it wasn't our ability to use tools, wasn't the thumbs and all that.
Yeah.
Because if each individual human was doing that, we still wouldn't have been so successful through the years.
Yeah.
It's because of the communication, and because you can tell people things like exact locations or where to look out for danger.
Yes.
And that communication within a tribe is why we thrived so much. Because humans aren't really that strong. Like, if you picture a human in the wild by themselves, they're
For
actually
sure.
like pretty fragile. Like, our bodies are pretty not very tough.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I fully see that. Fully see how that's the case. I think communication is something that should be taught almost as like a mandatory subject in school. I think it's so important, and yet we leave a lot of communication up for grabs.
Yeah.
Just assuming that it will all work itself out, or that someone who you just met and know nothing about will somehow understand your communication style and what you're trying to say in any given situation. And now that I have myself worked on communication a little bit, as with anything we talked about on the podcast, I can't go back. I can't go back to when I didn't know just how important communication is for any relationship.
Right. Okay. So I wanna ask you how you have worked on it, but I also do want to mention that at some point I want to ask you one thing that you think you're good at communication wise, and one thing that you think you're bad at, and then we'll do a little back and forth where I'll say one thing that I think you're good at, and maybe it can be one or multiple things on either side, good or bad.
Okay.
But I'll end up saying like, oh, I think this is something that you're not so good at, and you can do the same for me. So a fun little
so just to confirm, I'm answering the question right now as to how I've worked on my communication, and then further into the podcast we'll answer the second question.
Yeah. For now, just how have you actually been improving your communication?
Mostly it's been kind of tangible things that I've been doing differently when I am verbally communicating with someone. So as I just did with you, I clarified what you said so that I have a better understanding of it.
Nice technique there.
Yeah, just gonna sprinkle some techniques in throughout this hour.
Okay.
And that has been a game changer for me when you paraphrase back to someone. It's also something that I use in work, so it has been something I've been practicing for my professional life, and then been trying to implement into my personal life. When you hear someone say something and you repeat back to them what they've said, but not verbatim, you know, so it's not just like, you just said that you will ask me 2 questions, like, or whatever. Like, it's just more to be clear, or I want to make sure I'm understanding this right. I want to make sure I've got this. What you're trying to say is, those are some examples of things you might say when you're trying to clarify something. And of course, this isn't like if you're like, hey, do you want a bowl of soup? And I'm like, okay, just to be clear, you are offering me soup. That's not what I mean.
You're not doing it every single sentence.
Yeah, exactly. So I find paraphrasing really helpful when you're communicating with someone. It is also helpful to be actively listening. So to start with, so there isn't any misinterpretation or mishearing, that you are present with that person. You're maybe making eye contact. You're, physically open. So if you're facing them and you are in the moment listening to what they are saying so that you don't misinterpret something.
Right.
I think also when I'm going to say something, I try to think about what is the message I'm trying to convey, and is this the clearest form? Because sometimes I find I skip over things. It'll be, I'll be thinking about it in my head, and I'm jumping steps, and then I say it out loud, and then when someone questions me on what I've said, I realize that, oh yeah, I left out like three parts of that because I just thought that was assumed or something.
Right. So yeah, because you want to kind of close the gap between what you actually say and what you're intending to say, because sometimes people can hear things that you didn't actually even intend to say. Which another kind of going back to the why of why you want to develop communication, and that's one of them, so that you're not getting misinterpreted. And another thing that I really see from that is the presentation side. And I always think of the Dragon's Den or like Shark Tank, like those examples of how people are going in and presenting their product. And a lot of the time what ends up letting them have a successful showing on that Dragon's Den or Shark Tank show is more so the presentation and not as much the product. Obviously, the business people sitting on Dragon's Den and Shark Tank are legit and they want to invest their money in good products, but somebody could have a good product, present it poorly, and it just doesn't go well. Whereas somebody could have a not quite as good product but present it flawlessly, and they end up getting the money, and they end up getting the investments from the Dragon's Den team.
Actually, okay, I have two examples of this for anyone that likes marketing or marketing, I guess, of products. The podcast Under the Influence with Terry O'Reilly is really good, and I was just listening to that, and there are two examples of what you're just talking about, where a marketer went to pitch some advertising proposal to this big business, and the guy kept picking up the phone during the proposal. Yeah. And so the guy who was pitching it went out in the lobby and phoned the big business guy from the lobby telephone and pitched him the whole pitch over the phone, because he's like, now I won't be interrupted because no one else can phone you while I'm on the phone with you. Right. And I thought that was interesting because he just like in the moment quickly thought, okay, this isn't working, so let's pivot. And then I heard of another one where another marketing agency was trying to pitch to a guy who owned, I think, I could be getting this wrong, but I think he owned like a racehorse, a racehorse, whatever setup. Track, whatever. Yes. And they pitched him the advertising proposal, and the guy said no. And then they were leaving and like leaving down the driveway. And they said, wait a sec, this guy is in the market of horse races. He's in the market of betting. And so they went back and said, we bet you however much money, if we can get more people in your stands in a month, like you will pay us whatever, as a standard bet goes. Yeah. And the guy jumped on it. He was like, for sure, love betting, I'm in. Right. And so just that like pivoting and quick thinking of two examples of like in the marketing industry, which is a really interesting industry. Right. And always trying to think about from the other person's perspective. And I think that's a useful thing to do, whether it's a business negotiation or just even like a relationship thing in general, where you're not just coming with a proposal that is all about what you want. Yeah. You need to consider what the investor wants or what the other person in the relationship wants, and
if you bring them something that's just strictly highlighting all the reasons why it's going to benefit you, it's not likely to work.
Yeah, for sure. Another example is there was again, I don't know if this is a real story, but rather a just example of maybe how when you don't communicate something, you can't assume someone knows it about you.
Mm-hmm.
This couple was married for, I don't know, let's say like 50 some years, and for their whole time together, each of them would take the end piece of toast. Mm-hmm. And they assumed that it was because, like, you know, they were like, I'll take the end piece. No one likes the end piece of bread. And then at the end of their marriage, I don't know the situation, but they both disclosed to the other person that they actually really liked the end piece of toast, but thought the other person didn't.
Huh. So wait, they really liked the end piece?
But they took it like, no worries, I'll take it because I know you don't like it, kind of thing. There was something where
I see. Like,
the intention was incorrect. Yeah.
Like they'd pretend when the other one's taking the end piece, the other one would pretend like, oh, thank you for taking that.
Something like that. But again, the details, I guess, aren't as important as just the idea that
could go on for 40 years.
Yeah, and something like that seems like, well, that's just silly. Why don't you just say it? But I think we overlook a lot of scenarios in life where we don't communicate what we need or what we want or what we're looking for, and there's assumptions made all the time that someone will just understand without communication what it is we need.
Yeah, definitely. One thing that I was thinking of just for as to like why it's useful to develop your communication skills is the idea that you're almost like a filter, like your body, your voice, your mouth, everything is like a filter for your ideas. So let's say you have a good idea, but you cannot, as it's passing through the filter that is your voice, your mouth and your body and all the nonverbal ways of communication, is that filter improving the thought or is it decreasing the value of the thought? Right. So you might have a good thought, but unless you turn it into a good sentence and presented it well with body language and whatever else you can use for communication, it may not actually end up coming out as good. And nobody knows what you're thinking. Yeah. The only way people can know what you're thinking is if you communicate it to them.
Exactly. So, it's a preventative measure as much as it is what makes the world go round. It prevents a lot of conflict and straight up miscommunication when you are more intentional about what you're trying to say right away. Mm-hmm. Actually, in my own life yesterday, Matt and I had this where Matt said, hey, can you text so-and-so? And I thought, we know two people with the same name. And I texted the wrong person because I didn't clarify which one. Right. So I was just like, for sure. And it ended up like not being a super weird situation, but
Matt, especially what was it? Because if it was like a compliment or something, you texted the wrong person, and then you're like, "Oh, sorry, didn't mean to say that to you. Didn't mean to compliment you. I meant to send it to the other Sean or whatever."
Yeah, it was actually Ben, but we just had a little, and then when I showed him the text after, he was like, oh, okay, cool. He's like, yeah, I meant the other one, but he's like, that's great too.
Oh, it still worked.
It still worked. It actually was worked
did you even need to text the other Ben after that, or you're like, we got really, one Ben, we're good.
we did, but we didn't. You know, we could have rolled with that, so it worked out. But
well, that's a rare scenario because usually you'd think, okay, if we clarified, it would have saved us a headache, but you actually maybe
I'm counteracting what we're trying to
that's an unlikely scenario
in the book. Yeah, it was unlikely, and it also most of the time I think people would in that situation, it probably wouldn't be a universal Ben thing, you know. It'd probably be oh, you mean so and so, and you wouldn't even have to maybe explain that, you know. If there'd be certain people that whatever you're texting wouldn't apply to that other person, so it'd be obvious it's this person. In this situation, it actually was ambiguous.
Yeah, it's a funny one. Have you found the podcast itself has helped improve your communication from doing this?
Yeah, one of the things I really enjoy about the podcast is taking that extra moment to formulate my thoughts while simultaneously still being engaged in the conversation, and that you can do both, because
Right.
there is something to be said about not thinking about what you're going to say while someone else is talking, and how that can be taking you away from the present moment of listening to that other person.
Yeah, I find that very difficult, actually.
Yeah, I understand it is really difficult, but I have to say that just taking an extra moment to think about what I'm trying to say is really been helpful on the podcast. And not necessarily when you guys are talking, but it's just like even a split second thing where you're just like, let's just take a second, like review. What am I going to say? And then you go. And a podcast is interesting because it is a conversation, and you aren't getting to reread what you're saying or go over it. It's not like a speech where you've rehearsed it beforehand.
Right.
So it's definitely an interesting form of communication.
Have you found that there's like less fear of public speaking from doing the podcast, or maybe like a little bit less hesitation when you're speaking in public? Because the podcast, although there's no like audience right in front of us, you know that on the other side of the mic, through the wires, eventually this is gonna get posted to the public. Because I'm just asking that because for me, I feel a little bit of that by speaking on the podcast pretty frequently. I feel like I'm less nervous about public speaking than I used to be.
Yeah, that's cool. That's good.
Do you feel that at all, or no?
Yeah, I might. I actually have. I enjoy public speaking sometimes, and depending on what I talk about, I don't feel overly nervous. So maybe I'm just at a different level of my comfort with public speaking.
Yeah, no, that definitely could be. But either way, it allows you to work on certain things, and there's so many different things.
Yes.
The listening thing one, I know that's a massive communication skill that's so important. How do you think people can get better at that? Because it is so tempting to, or maybe it's a habit that people have developed. Mm-hmm. Either way, it's something that is very common for when the other person's talking. Your mind just starts to go to thinking of what you're going to say next, and not so much really listening to what they're saying.
Yeah, it's tying into last week's podcast on hard work, active listening is something that requires hard work. It requires putting in the work. I think most people would think it is an effort, because it's so easy to jump in, interject. It's something I do myself sometimes, where I finish people's sentences, which is not a flattering communication style.
Yeah.
And you'll find, though, the reward of active listening is really nice. I think that if you take the time to actively listen, and actively listening, as I mentioned before, is that idea that you are not doing anything else, and your intention is to listen to that other person. So that is the goal. You're not there to wait till you get to talk. You're there to listen. You're making eye contact. You're all those things I had mentioned before. But it's way easier said than done, especially in a world where I think multitasking is popular and encouraged. And Ollie's like, you are such a hypocrite right now.
I heard you say, you don't want to be doing anything else. Meanwhile, Kailey's like knitting a blanket.
Crocheting. I'm crocheting. And okay, my one rebuttal from this is that my experience with crocheting is quite vast, and therefore crocheting is not something that I think about anymore while I'm doing.
Right. Yeah. It's basically, you're just moving your hands, and it's just
to me, it's like walking and talking.
Right.
But even less of a thing. Like it's not something that I'm like, wow, I'm doing two things at once. It's just like, we'll go for a walk and talk, or like I'll sit and crochet and we talk. Like that's
right. Okay. Yeah. No. When you put it like that, it doesn't sound as bad. But yeah, when you see somebody doing something else where they're fiddling with their hands, you probably would have an assumption that they're not paying as full of attention.
And I guess
But
though,
when you realize that, like for you, it doesn't actually take much space in your mind to
yeah,
weave that blanket
yeah,
or scarf or whatever you're making.
the blanket.
Um,
Thank you for checking in on what it was.
yeah.
But I also will say, so with communication, it's very much a two-way street. And with me sitting here and crocheting, I didn't tell Ollie beforehand that I'd be crocheting. And he said, "You're going to be crocheting while we do the podcast?" And I said, "Yes." And then I do think it's your responsibility to, if it's distracting you or bothering you, to communicate that to me, because I won't know if you passive aggressively go, "Are you sure that's
Hey,
not a
okay, well, I didn't say that.
No. That's what I mean. You didn't say that, but that's what I mean. You can either do two things, which is us just discussing it,
Yeah, yeah.
and then after you say, "Hey, that was distracting," or you could, not you, but you could passive aggressively be say.
Thank you for clearing that up, because
Yeah,
you kept saying you as if it was me.
Yeah,
But
sorry.
it was more general, because I did say, "Oh, you're gonna be distracted and you're not gonna be paying attention."
Yeah, and that's fair, although a little bit accusatory, but I felt.
Right. Okay. Well, yeah. This is where communication can really get into the weeds here.
Yeah, I statements are really important in communication as well.
I statements.
Yeah. If you are,
I feel that, and
yeah, in a let's say a conflict or something where it might be a little bit more of a sensitive topic to be discussing, using an I statement can be really helpful, because you aren't putting any assumptions on that other person, and you can only speak from your perspective and how you feel, and by saying I felt this opposed to you do this. So that just it's like a soft startup to the conversation of there isn't going to be blame here, and we can have a civil conversation, and this is the heart of communication, where we're both saying our piece and our perspective, and we can understand each other better.
Right. I did want to go back to the listening thing for a little bit, because I was just thinking, like, you don't necessarily even need to be doing anything. Like, you don't need to be making blankets or like doing whatever to be distracted.
Yes.
A lot of it is just like you zone out, and your own mind races to a bunch of different areas.
Yeah, I'm sure we've all been on the receiving end as well as the other end of that. I know I have both been in a situation where I've said something, I can tell that the person's not doing anything, but I can tell they didn't like register. And then I've also been where I hear someone talking, then I'm like, wait, what did they just say? I got none of that.
Right. And so some of the things that you've been doing, how do you think you can improve your communication skills? Like, just through, like, what are certain things you can practice?
Okay, so listening, we talked about.
Yeah.
I think that, I guess going in with the intention of communicating that you both, that you want to understand that person's perspective, that you do maybe want to resolve something, that your intention is pure. So you know that, maybe you're in a bad mood, or you're not ready to have, a hard conversation. Well, then maybe that should be postponed to another time, because I think you need to be well-intentioned when you want to communicate something.
Yeah. You know what I just realized, actually?
No.
I was thinking, okay, good that you don't know. But I was just thinking, I was at the beginning when I talked to you about the crocheting, I was like, oh, you're going to be distracted because you'll be fiddling your hands. But as we're going, I'm realizing that it's distracting me probably more than you.
Is it distracting you? Like, in what way is it distracting you? You just keep
I don't know. I
glancing
just
at
keep looking at the crochet, like the blanket, and your hands are just constantly moving.
Right. So do you want me to stop?
Well, no, you can keep going, because I know you have to finish that for deadlines and whatnot. And also, maybe it'll be good practice to be able to focus with a little bit of a distraction.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I can stop if need be. But please communicate that.
Yeah. Okay.
Because I won't know.
I want to get into the one thing, or like it could be a couple things, but what are some things that you think you're a very good communicator at, and what are some things that you think you're bad at? And actually, before you answer that, I just thought about, we brought up some things that you could do to improve your communication.
Yeah.
And some things that I think work quite well are just reading more, kind of expanding your vocabulary a little bit, and seeing how other people phrase certain things. And that's what you're going to get out of reading a lot, is you wouldn't necessarily structure sentences in the ways that you'll see in a lot of the books you're reading. It's going to be different ways of saying certain things, and I think the more different ways of saying certain things that you have, then you can kind of pick the ones that you want, and you'll hopefully have a better presentation because of it.
Yeah.
So reading more, writing, because that's kind of you just putting it into practice of structuring things, and as you write, you're thinking, and then speaking, obviously, which is just that's pretty given.
For sure. I actually thought of one more. I'm thinking again, I guess, less so in the casual, small verbal interactions you have with people, but more so if you are trying to have maybe a more serious discussion with someone, to reflect yourself on what you're trying to say, and does it make sense to you? Because sometimes when you like you said, when you write something out, or just kind of think back to it a little bit more thoroughly, you might realize that you had your own kind of misinterpretation or something that before you go into a discussion hot, you can kind of reflect back and say, okay, now that I've like rationally thought about these things, I have
right, like take a little bit of time to gather your thoughts before you go into things.
Yes. Yeah,
I think that's a pretty key thing. Almost as though, like, there's a lot of things you will prepare for. Like if you're going into an interview and you know you're going to be grilled, like you think about it. That's and you true. Go in, you think about what you're going to say, what you might be asked, and because you thought about all that stuff, your performance is better.
Yeah, that's true.
Thinking things over can be beneficial.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we can get back to that. What do you think you excel in communication wise, and what are some areas where you're not very good?
Well, it's pretty easy to bring up the point I brought up before, that I tend to interject when people are saying something, because I feel like, I think it's an insecurity thing, that if I know what someone's going to say, or I like can finish the sentence and be like, oh, you mean this? It almost gives me a little bit of
you want to be the one that takes the credit, kind of.
Yeah, exactly.
And I just kind of cut you off and finish your sentence.
Well, what you did actually is
while saying
yeah.
That's good.
But what you did actually also was kind of like you put in better words, because it wasn't coming to me. So in that sense, it was helpful. Because
to be fair, you can a lot of time notice people if they're having a little bit of a hesitation, and you don't want to let them just blank out and not find the words, then in some ways it could actually be helpful.
Yeah, I can't just sit there and be like, I can't come up with what I'm trying to say. I can't it's just...
And you know what they want to say, but you're like, oh, I'm not telling you.
Yeah, but I think for me, I could use a little bit of reservation when trying to complete people's sentences, but I think it is a little bit of like just wanting to feel like I am intelligent, or that I know the response, and it's more of like an ego thing for me, I think. So it's not necessarily helpful. I don't have people going like, wow, thank you so much for taking the words out of my mouth.
No, I don't think that usually happens. You'll get the opposite.
Yeah, so that's something I could work on, I think.
What about things you're good at? And that might be harder for you to say, depending, like for some people. For most people, I think that could be a harder thing to figure out.
Yeah.
Because people often have a tougher time finding the praise for themselves.
I do think, though, for a lot of people, I think I'm a good listener. And I say for a lot of people because I know that my style of active listening, being like very active listening, that I like nod my head a lot and I say, oh yes, oh that's hard and that's difficult, and I do a lot of I don't know, like little reassurances when people are
feedback
so
feedback,
people know
you're genuinely listening.
Yes,
yeah.
And so I know that's not for everyone. Some people don't necessarily appreciate that, but I would say that when I'm having a longer conversation with someone, I'm pretty good at listening.
Yeah, You mentioned that some people might not necessarily appreciate it, and it reminded me of the feedback you can give in conversation that's like, yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think sometimes that one doesn't come off the right way. Or if
Right.
somebody's saying something, you're like, yeah, yeah, yeah. They're like, oh, this is obvious. Like you don't
Yeah,
even
yeah,
need me
yeah.
to say this. It's just like, yeah, yeah, yeah. Like it's almost like dismissive in a sense.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
it's not usually, it's not always intended to be like that. Because I've
No.
accidentally done that sometimes where I'm like, yeah, yeah, yeah. And the person's like, oh, like you can tell that like just
Yeah.
put a frown on their face because they're like, oh, okay,
It
whatever.
also is interesting those little things are so open to interpretation because as you just said, from my perspective, if I say yeah, 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 I it's just me kind of it's more of like a chummy way of being like, yes, I understand. And
Right.
unless I say that to every person I'm going to use that phrase on, they will interpret it how they experience that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it comes down to not even so much what you're saying, especially with that one, but more so how you're saying it, which is
And
like
like
the
brushing
nonverbal
people
stuff
off.
and maybe like even like the smiling and whatnot. Because if you are in agreement with somebody and that's why
Yeah.
you want to say yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
but you do it like yeah, yeah, yeah versus yeah, 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 or like, you know what I mean? It's like
Yeah.
a slightly
True.
different thing, a
True.
different tone and
Lots
different.
of nonverbal there's lots to nonverbal communication.
Yeah.
Also as someone who has been told many times that I have a very monotone voice,
Mm-hmm.
this has had me in little bits of some pickles because I will say something and someone thankfully tells me right away that they've misinterpreted. Like I remember in high school telling someone that I liked their shoes, and it was a friend of mine, and they were like, "Wow, like you don't have to be so sarcastic, like just because you don't like them."
Right.
And I was like horrified because I thought. I was genuinely like, "Oh, I love your shoes, it's great," but because of my voice, sometimes I feel like it betrays me a little bit because I just sound like I'm either don't care about anything and being really sarcastic, or there's a little bit of tone in there and maybe the message gets across. But
Yeah.
I've experienced that, you know, over the years that people say that I just don't have much tone, so it's hard to tell sometimes if I am maybe just like over something. I'm just like, yeah, that's great.
Yeah, tone is definitely key. I for sure have the monotone troubles as well, but less so because I see you sometimes you do get extremely excited, and maybe because it is a contrast between the normal, where sometimes it might be like, is that real? You're actually just that excited. You know what I mean? Where
Yeah,
it's like, oh, okay,
right.
you're really like
Wait, what
that
do you mean I
pumped.
get that excited? Because I definitely don't like we talked about on the last podcast. I tend to be pretty reserved, so me being excited isn't me like jumping for joy, going like, "Oh my gosh!" Like
Yeah,
you screaming or anything.
not maybe maybe not quite like that, but just like, oh, I love that shirt, or I don't know how to
Yeah, that's
something like
fine.
that, but
That's
like where
fine.
it's like really though, or are you just saying that?
No, I would say 99.9% of the time I am genuinely wanting to
Yeah,
compliment someone on their
right. And
clothes.
and that's the interesting thing too is once you get to know people, you'll start to learn their communication styles,
Yeah.
and you've probably had moments like that where someone maybe you introduce somebody to somebody else and they're like, oh, like I don't think they like me that much or whatever, and you're like, no, no, that's just the way they are. And it might not
Yes.
be in certain, it might not be it'll be different reasons why you'll end up in a situation like that, but that'll often happen where you kind of need to
Yes,
figure out
that's
people's specific styles, and you're like, no, no, they weren't trying to be mean, no, they weren't trying to be rude, or they don't not like you. It's just that's just them, and I've known them for way longer than you have, so
yeah,
you
that's
wouldn't know
true.
that yet.
And I think actually a good point, a segue into when you do have good communication, it doesn't mean that either person, let's say we're talking just two people in communicating with each other, you're not um, you're not going to have one person change so that they communicate like the other person. What successful communication is learning how two people communicate and compromise as to fitting with both of you. So as you get to know someone, it's not like it's like you know, like you need to fix this and do this and make this more clear. It's rather like understanding both people's types of communication, and then both parties putting in effort to communicate that, but not necessarily that their either communication style needs to be wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think you can have improvements in like your like tonality and like body language.
That's
and stuff.
true,
Like,
and there is bad communication. Like you could,
yeah, there is.
That is,
and you don't want to necessarily just excuse it like, oh, that's, I know what they actually meant. They were horrible with communicating that, but it's your fault because you don't know them that well. Like,
yes.
You can't necessarily just do that because you need people to improve. And I did want to say too that it's like it's on either end where you want to understand how the other person tends to communicate and also how the other person tends to receive things. So some people might receive certain things very poorly, and if you get a better understanding of that, you can end up having a better communication with them. Like if somebody's really bad with disagreements or like gets really offended if you criticize something about them, then maybe you can present it in a little bit of a better way and be a little bit more cautious of that. So
yeah,
that's just one example I can think of right off the top, but the general idea is that it's not just understanding how the other person tends to communicate, but also how do they receive things and what are certain things that they really appreciate and whatnot. That's
very true. And like we were kind of getting started on talking about what we're both good and bad at for communication, we need to get back to that. It might be a good start to understand your level of communication or how you communicate. And it doesn't mean that you have to like call up a friend and be like, what am I bad at or good at with communication? But just a little self-reflection, because I think that's good to kind of know your baseline. It's like, do I genuinely feel like I have a bunch of like misinterpretations or things go wrong because it turns out someone didn't know what I was trying to say? Or does that happen frequently in your life? Then maybe, there's areas of improvement. Or maybe you're thinking like, wow, my communication with anyone in my life is always so seamless.
Right. Yeah, and we can get back to the positive and the negative if you want to say any more about yourself. If not, I'll try to think of some for me.
I don't know. I realized that I said yes when you just said something.
Yeah, but like I was saying, I don't know if that's necessarily bad. If you say it in a good way, like if you're like yes, especially yes is better.
A little bit more.
Yeah is not as that's a little bit more like.
I would say my family probably like you guys and the rest of the
like
fam.
Me?
Like you, my brother, you probably hear me say yeah most. It's not something
well, yeah, I don't know, maybe I'm a bad listener, but I actually don't hear you say that much. I hear I hear myself say it.
I thought when you brought that up, you were specifically bringing it up about me.
No, maybe I should have been a little more clear there, a bit better communication.
Isn't this interesting?
No, and that's the thing too, is there's often a tendency for people to assume things are like directed at them.
Yes.
Like I kind of assumed when you were using the word you, which to be fair, that word literally means you.
Yeah,
so
I know.
But at the same time, like it's common for people to assume that, oh, they're talking about me.
Yes. Where because I say yeah. That instantly resonated with me. So I was like, oh, that's probably him saying that's what you're bad at with communicating, because a part of me I think thinks that. So when it just is like, yeah, that's me.
No, I was actually thinking that I've done that in the past, and like you notice some people don't necessarily pick it up that well because they're like, oh, you're just dismissing me, kind of.
I've heard you do that when I know that you're in a bad mood. And
again, that's the thing actually, because when I think about it, I have done it actually to dismiss. So that's probably part of the reason where like someone is just like, oh, what did you do here? And I'm like, yeah. Or that's not a good example.
No, I know. I can't think of an example either, but I have heard you say that. But it comes back to like, I know you well enough, so I'm not going to, take that too personally. But I know that it's just like, oh, Ollie's having a bad day. So he said that. Now, without saying anything, you've told me that now's not a good time for us to like be chatting about all sorts of things.
Right.
And again, it's interesting how different levels of communication are required depending on who you know. And probably, on one hand, communication could be easier with the people that you live with or spend the most time with. And then on the other hand, it requires the constant effort and the constant check-ins. And things can still be misinterpreted no matter how well you know someone.
Right.
Yeah.
And I do want to get into the one where we talk about what the other person might be bad at for communication or good.
Fire away.
But first, I'll say the things that I find that I'm bad at or good at.
Okay.
And one of the things that I don't find I'm very good at is similar to you about the monotoneness and not always the best tonality. And I think a lot of that comes down to, like, in a sense, laziness kind of, but also just that's my voice at the same time. But part of it is a bit of laziness of just like because it takes that little bit of extra effort sometimes to present things in a certain tone.
Don't be too hard on yourself. I think just growing up, we maybe both our parents kind of have a more monotone voice. So I do think it is more just the way we, not only our voices are that we're born with, but also just the environment we grew up in.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of your voice just really does come down to your genetics, like how your vocal cords or whatever have been developed and all that. Because I there's no way, like, I can't sound like I don't know, Celine Dion or something. Like it's but like, yeah, you're not gonna sound like, you can't really modify your voice that much, I don't think. But another thing is, on the negative side, is sometimes I have a tendency to get into arguments or disagreements that maybe you could just brush it aside, where like I might have a tendency to be like, I can't, if somebody says something that I disagree with, I'll have a tougher time of being like, just letting it go, whereas I'll just be like, well, actually, like, we gotta, you know what I mean? Like,
yes.
Well, technically.
Yes. I think we should have encouraged you to be on the debate team from a young age, so you could, because you do enjoy, you enjoy discussion. It's not that you want to like prove someone wrong. I think you just enjoy the devil's advocate.
That's another bad one there, where I immediately, especially when people bring things up, my mind will immediately go to, how could that be not the truth? Like, how could that be wrong? And I think that helps me when I'm doing some like problem solving thing, because I'll come up with an idea and I'll be like, wait a sec, how could that not be right?
Yeah.
And then you start to keep questioning it. Okay, maybe that's wrong. How could it be different?
Right. And
but then I'll have a tendency when other people do it too, where like they'll say something, I'm like, oh, how could that be not right?
It sounds like that's good for problem solving. And I do think it's also good that you have awareness that sometimes in communication and connecting with someone, that can be left out.
Yeah. And knowing when and when not to do it, I think is important. Like when to make the decision of like, oh, I can just leave, I can stay out of this one. Because sometimes I'll hear two other people arguing and debating, and especially depending on who it is, I just can't help but like join in and be like, what's going on here? You know what I mean? Yeah,
so that sounds like, firstly, the awareness is really important, that you're aware of that, and that you are in control of that. And so if you so choose to practice that and have some self-control in that area, you can work on that. But I think it's really good that you at least have the awareness.
On the good side, one thing I'm thinking of is I feel like I'm good at not letting stuff, stones go unturned, I guess would be a saying.
That's true. You're very thorough.
Or like I won't let stuff necessarily slide. Like if it's bothering me, I'll bring it up.
Yes,
like,
that's true.
You
don't like seethe quietly.
Seethe?
Yeah, like anger. You wouldn't be upset quietly. You would reflect quietly, and then you'd say, hey, that did bother me.
Yeah, for sure. Like I won't let something just like pretend like, oh, everything's fine.
Yeah.
Like I want to get things sorted out.
You're not passive aggressive.
No, and
I don't just say, oh, well, that's too bad you didn't do that. You're like, no, I actually don't think you should do that for this reason.
Yeah, like if I call myself being passive aggressive, I would hate that.
Okay.
Like I don't like being passive aggressive, and I like getting things sorted out, because I from what I've seen, like if you don't sort things out, it just builds resentment, and
Yeah.
you gotta get it all hashed out, and eventually we'll get into the Five Guys story.
Yeah, why don't
but
we
I want
just
to do one thing before that. It's just
okay.
you, because I did really want to talk about you mentioning the things that I'm bad at, and vice versa.
Yes, that's what I was
But
going to say.
really hashing things out has been useful for me and you in particular, where we will sit down for like an hour and sort things out if we had a disagreement.
Yeah, like from the outside perspective, you might look at Ollie and my conversation sometime and think we're talking in circles, but I think we're both just like chipping away and really getting a clear understanding of something, so we see the whole picture. I think we've talked about uncovering dinosaur bones in the past, kind of like that, where you really got to dust
Yeah, okay.
dust those off, really see the whole, the whole dinosaur. And we tend to talk in great detail about every kind of angle and perspective that someone might have had in a situation. But I agree, before we talk about the infamous Five Guys, let's just quickly go over from an outsider perspective, goods and bads of our communication.
Yeah. I was thinking one bad thing for you.
Okay.
But as we've had this conversation, I feel like you've gotten quite better at that. And I was just realizing from some of the points that you brought up.
Yeah.
But I was going to say sometimes you might be a little passive aggressive.
Right.
And like you'll say things like, "Oh, are you sure you're going to do that?" And the thing is, I might see, "Oh, I know what she's trying to say."
Yeah.
But for me, if you don't directly say it, even if I see that you're like what your intention is, sometimes I'll just ignore it, and maybe that's a fault of mine.
Yeah.
But it's like, just say it then if you really want me to know. And it's like almost like I'm not gonna fully respect it if I don't hear you just say it. You know what I mean? And
yes,
and
you won't follow through. But okay, yes, actually, so two things. I fully agree with you on both the idea that I do tend to, or I have sometimes been more passive aggressive, and then also that I think I've improved on that, and I've noticed great rewards when I am clear about something and I'm not subtle. And then, okay, segueing into subtleness, I actually, again, why I think communication should be learned in school, I thought for a long time that passive aggressiveness wasn't necessarily a bad thing, and rather just a subtle way of introducing your idea or your thought. And that it was a less maybe in your face way of being like, "Oh, do you maybe this?" But now I actually don't like it at all. I can't stand.
There may be a time and a place for it.
There
Like
might be.
if you really don't want to offend, it's like almost like you weigh the scenario, and is it worth just directly saying it and offending somebody, or like I think what it depends on is how badly do you actually want that point to get across. And if you don't even really care to tell that person, then it's like, okay, I don't really care if you even get the message. I'll just do some passive.
And I do
like,
well,
not even aggressive, but just more like a passive.
But I feel like passive communication isn't really ever beneficial because of what it is, and rather what you're speaking about is just maybe more gentleness in your communication.
That is probably more what I'm trying to say. Just a little more
passiveness,
gentle.
basically, it's like if...
Well, gentle is passive.
It's like if you came over to my house and you like opened the cookie jar and you started eating cookies, and I said, "Oh, you're gonna eat cookies before dinner?"
And I'm just like, yeah.
And then, but that's me. That's passive communication, because I'm basically saying,
don't eat those.
Don't eat cookies. Yeah. That's like, I'm questioning that, but I'm not saying, "Hey, we're about to eat dinner. I would prefer if you didn't eat cookies."
And the thing is, some people, you could in that situation be completely oblivious to what you're saying. A lot of the time you'd hope people would get the hint, but then sometimes people will get the hint, but they just don't care because you didn't directly say it, and they're just like, "Oh yeah, I am," and then you're like, "Okay," and you're like, "Yeah, I'm gonna eat these cookies." Like you know that the person kind of wants you to not, but if they're being passive aggressive, it's not always treated as highly. You know what I mean? Because it's like, it's But another thing, and the only reason I wanted to bring up the bad ones just because I feel like it'd be a little bit more fun, and you can hammer me with whatever bad ones you think.
No, I appreciate this, because honestly, if I am saying that I'm open to this idea of us discussing bad and good communication styles, then I have to be open to the idea that you will
Right,
speaking
right.
on that. So I've already
Yeah.
agreed to that. If I'm not okay with it and I'm building up resentment, that's on me to say, you know what, actually, this
Yeah.
is not okay with me.
And
I'm
the
feeling
bad ones are more
uncomfortable.
fun. I almost want you to say the bad ones because they're more fun.
Okay.
Um, but one other thing I was thinking is like sometimes you hammer me with like 8 questions at once, where it's like whoa, like one at a time here. You know what I mean? Like you'll be like, "What's this? And what'd you do there? And who was that?" It's like I can't answer 19 questions at one time, so I'll pick one, and like because sometimes you could receive 10 questions, and like now it's almost my responsibility to structure and organize those questions. But okay, I'll answer that one first, and then I'll do the second one, and it could be too many. And
I
what's your rebuttal? It depends on that
Yeah,
one.
well, no, I think that's a fair point. And then my only thing is, so for sure, I can ask less questions because I'm the one asking the questions. I can do that. And then you also can say in the moment, that's too many questions. I'm going to answer this one.
Hmm. Yes, but isn't that a little bit of like a deflection of like, okay, two wrongs don't make a right, like, or like, because you in
Yeah.
a sense started the bad communication behavior, like,
Right, right. Well, I think, okay, yes, yes.
and now you're like, it's your responsibility. You should have said that was
No,
too
I
many
agree, but
questions.
I just want to like I feel like I need to paint a little bit of a picture for our listeners of what all these
Okay, here we
communications
go.
are, because what I think you're referring to is when I see you, I haven't seen you for a couple days or something, and then I say, Ollie, how's work going? What are you having for lunch? Did you make your meal prep? Did you go do Muay Thai today? Are you going to work out? And I'm like, some people might interpret that as, wow, you're very interested in your brother's life and you want to check up on him, and you're checking in all these ways. It's not like I'm like, Ollie, can you drive me to the grocery store? When are you going to drive me to the grocery store? Can we go to the grocery store? Like, I'm not bombarding you with demands
Yeah.
in my questions. Would you agree that that is typically when you say I ask a lot of questions, it's usually me
No, yeah,
asking you
it's
about
not
your life?
demands. Well, when you put it like that, I sound like the bad guy for having a problem with it. But
But no, but I think it's important to
yeah,
clarify what you're saying when you say I ask a lot of questions, because when I hear that, I hear it as like, okay, you prefer one question, which is totally fine. No, I that makes sense. But it is, you prefer one question when I'm asking you about you.
yeah, you're not necessarily asking me about bad things,
Yeah.
but
Okay.
yeah, that is it in general.
Okay. And what else?
Um, for the good one, I find you're good at giving people like acknowledgement and like praise, or like saying thank you when you like being supportive in that sense. You know what I mean? Like you'll tell people when you appreciate them. Whereas
Right.
that for me personally is one thing that I find tough, especially for whatever reason with family. Like I even find it difficult sometimes to like be thankful, like saying thank you to, I don't know why, if it's like for some reason particular with family, but like I notice you're usually good at that and like showing people that you appreciated.
That's a learned
Um,
skill for me, something I practice, because I also think our family in general
yeah,
is not the best at communicating how we feel.
yeah, because I find
We didn't grow up talking about our feelings.
I'm better at being appreciative with people that aren't my family.
Yeah, I think it has something to do with just because I relate to that. I think it has something to do with just not talking about our feelings or being vulnerable in our family for many years, and growing up where you didn't put yourself out there by thanking someone, like in a, anything more than just like thank you.
Right, right.
So I think now maybe it almost seems a little uncomfortable because it's just like there is some vulnerability there when you're thanking someone. I think actually that's a good point for me. Maybe one thing that I think is a good, I don't want to say that I necessarily do this well, but something that I think might be a good part is actually in the moment acknowledging when someone has listened to you, and thanking them when they have maybe communicated or done something that helped with communication.
Right.
So that can go a long way too, when you just take a moment to acknowledge that in the moment and say thank you for listening to that, or I really feel like you understood, or I'm glad we discussed this and we cleared things up. That's been helpful.
Right. And that's another thing you're good at, I find, is you're like trying to understand people. Like you can tell you're often empathetic and really trying to understand where the other person's coming from.
Right. Thank you.
Probably because a lot of that comes from, I mean, you've had definitely some practice with your work and stuff, but like you're good with that.
Yes, thank you. I feel like I want to understand other people, and I feel like it's maybe a little bit there's a little bit of a kind of a selfish motive. Not that I don't genuinely want to understand someone, but also because I want to learn their new
Mm-hmm.
perspective. Like I
Right.
genuinely am like I want to learn more so that I can be a better, like, well-rounded person to understand. If someone else feels so strongly about this, or they really want to eat cookies before dinner, okay, well, let me get in their shoe. Like, why?
Yeah.
And then it might be, oh, they haven't eaten all day. Okay, eat the
Right.
cookies. It just feel like it's helpful to kind of say, okay, for me standing over here, I don't know what is going on in your head, and you reaching for the cookies, I shouldn't make assumptions based on me
Mm.
standing over here not wanting to eat cookies.
Yeah.
So let's,
It often becomes a lot harder to be really critical of other people when you really understand them. You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
you truly understand their motivations and why they're doing the things you're doing. It becomes a lot harder to
yeah,
be like upset at them in a way and critical of them.
yeah,
And then you also did mention that like you're trying to learn from the conversations, which I always really like the idea of like you're almost like it's like when you're having a conversation with two people, three people, whatever, everybody's kind of throwing their ideas into like a
yeah,
pot and you're
yeah,
like making like a soup and now
yes,
you like mix all the ideas around, they're all bouncing around off each other. And ideally with a good conversation, if people are throwing in good ideas and willing to remove the ideas that they were incorrect on,
yeah.
then you end up with a beautiful soup that's just like
Beautiful
better
soup.
ideas than each individual person would have had on their own.
Drop a soup emoji if you agree.
Yes, please drop a soup emoji.
Yeah, it's very true. It's very true. Um, okay, let's talk about what you are good and bad at. What I think.
Yeah, go for it.
So I agree with all the things you said, that you are a great problem solver. If you have something, you're very thorough, and you're very good at looking at things from all perspectives. Like you're really good at looking at the 360 view of something, of a problem, and a good researcher as well. And I would say in general, you're a good listener, and you're open to, actually, I find that you're willing to sit down when someone wants to talk to you and actually like talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
You don't often say, I mean, perhaps it isn't a good time, and that's totally fine, but you don't often say like, no, 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 I don't really like, we're not going to do this. You will say, okay, we can talk about this. Or you also have that genuine curiosity where you're like, okay, what do you want to say, or what's going on here? And you like
Yeah.
discussing things. Um, for negatives, I think you and I have different communication styles that we've
Mm-hmm.
worked very hard to get to a place where we understand that, and also like the give and take of working with each other's communication styles. So I don't really, it's not really like I don't have
Don't be
anything.
afraid to say
No,
some
I
bad
know
ones.
that. I know that. I'm just
Yeah.
trying to figure out. I guess it may be just like your clearness on what you say. Like
Yeah.
sometimes I feel like you leave things out sometimes, where you might say like,
Oh, I see. Yeah.
I'm going, like you maybe mention one part of the story, and then not even a story. You mention one part of like your message, and then you kind of, I think, make assumptions that I'll get I'll read between the lines and know exactly what you're trying to say.
Yeah, I kind of see what you mean. I think sometimes
An example
I
of,
don't like yeah, cuz to me it's like okay, maybe I know some what's going on and now it would be take an extra couple steps to fill other people in on it.
yeah,
And a lot of the time I don't do those steps and I don't fill people in on things. Like what I like if I had a plan or if I was thinking things, I'll just kind of not always fill people in because that's like a little bit of extra. That's one more step kind of.
yeah,
And I'll just I'll
yeah.
just like
It
be
might
like,
be
"Oh,
an
I don't want
important
to do
step.
that." Yeah.
Okay, this is like a trivial example, but we were talking yesterday about playing badminton, and I was like, we should play badminton. You're like, yeah, we should play badminton.
Did I? I
Yeah.
think it was mom who said that.
No, you said it too.
Okay, maybe.
You said yeah, I'd play badminton because you didn't want to. You said it's okay. I want to see how this work out because we were working out. And
Right. No, the thing is, you probably don't even realize all the steps that I don't fill you in on, especially with this example, because like in my mind, I'm like, yeah, I'll play badminton, but I also need to go to the grocery store right now, so I won't play right now. And I also don't really feel like setting up the net. So if you set up the net and after I go to the grocery store, then I'll play.
And you
but
didn't
I'll
say
just
any
be
of
like,
that
yeah,
aloud.
I want to play badminton. Because the thing is, to me, you asked me, do I want to play? And I'm like, yes, I actually do want to play. That would be fun.
So there might be a negative for you is your literalness. If I ask Ollie, do you want to play badminton? Yes, I want to play. And then if I like, I'll set up the net, hypothetically, I'd set up the net and then be like, ready to play? And you'd be like, oh no, I can't play today. I just wanted to play, but like I can't. And it's like, okay, did that in your head really seem like that was what you were conveying, the message you were conveying?
Yeah.
Like that might be that's what I mean. You sometimes
that's one that you
skip,
get
and
better at for sure.
The badminton example, like I was gonna say, was actually that you came upstairs and they were like, you had your keys in hand. I could tell you were leaving, and you're like, I'm going to the grocery store, and it was like, okay, right. I didn't communicate anything to you at that time either. I wasn't like, we're supposed to play badminton because whatever. We didn't really plan that, but you kind of do skip steps, and then you might say the end step and say, I have to do this, but you don't communicate the thoughts you've had that have led up to that, so that I then know the background as to what you're saying.
Because I think it might be a little bit of a mix between sometimes your suggestions lack detail, in my opinion, whereas like, because like you had another time where you're like, do you want to go hiking? And I'm like, yeah. In my mind, I'm like, hiking's good. But there's no time, there's no place,
right?
There's none of those details. So I'm like, yeah, hiking's good. And then you show up the next day and you're like, why aren't we hiking? And I'm like, I said I wanted to hike, yes. But to me, in my mind, for the next day, I have no plans of hiking unless we establish where we're hiking and what time, and we both agreed on it. Because in my mind, if the day passes and we're on to the day that you thought we were going to hike and we don't have those details, hiking's not in my day. Yeah. So I think it might be a mix of like, for you, I guess, clearing up all of the details. And for me, when I say, yes, I want to hike.
You could maybe add in, I need all the details before I agree.
Yeah. Because to me, I guess like if you're the one presenting the hiking, I'm like, well, I'll stay out of this. I'll give the minimal amount of answers as possible. I'll say yes. And like, then if you want to tell me when and where, you tell me. Like, but I guess that's on me where like, well, I think it depends how badly I want to play badminton. If I don't want to play that badly, I'll just be like, yeah, I'll play. But I won't take the extra effort to be like, oh, when are we playing? Where are we going to play? Because I don't actually want to play that bad.
And I would appreciate if you say, I don't actually want to play that bad. So, yeah, I'd play. But
like,
I'm not.
Do the tone there. Like,
yeah,
sure, I'd play. Something like that.
That's perfect, yeah.
Okay, any other good bad ones? Well, I want to get into that 5 guys. I don't want to leave people hanging again.
Well, we might have to leave people hanging,
Oh,
actually.
no, really?
I think we might. Well, it's just we're over an hour now.
Yeah, I know. It wouldn't be the longest podcast we've ever done. Hour 15, I think, was the longest one. But,
okay. Well, I feel like we maybe should leave people hanging just out of interest of time. So.
Well, is that all the good and bad things you wanted to say? Because I think about it for my benefit of you need to tell me the bad ones.
Yeah, it's learning for both of us. It's not to criticize. I
mean, maybe that's
it. I don't know. It's so interesting. I find our communication so interesting because it's really been a journey for us. We've not it's not gone unnoticed how many times we have had some miscommunication.
Yeah.
And we worked on it though. I appreciate that both of us are willing to sit down and discuss something. And yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting, like being siblings. You're 4 years younger than me, and we have a lot of different communication styles, and yet similar. I don't know. It's just it's interesting. I feel like I've had the most like growth with communication from our discussions on communication,
right?
Or us working through things, because it's shed light on things that I've communicated and how I can do better. And I mean, the 5 guys catastrophe day really was a learning experience for both of us.
Yeah. to me, now that I'm thinking about it, because obviously part of the reason doing this podcast about communication is to try to, I don't know, tell some interesting communication stories, but also to get better at it ourselves. And for me, what I'm seeing a lot of my improvements coming from is just effort.
Okay.
Because
yeah,
I see a lot of my like the negative things that you brought up about my communication coming down from a lack of effort. And it might not be obvious to you that that's what it is.
Yeah.
But to me, a lot of it is like, I just don't want to tell. Like, I don't want to tell you that, and I don't want to. Like, it's just like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just like a little bit more effort to.
But you see how bothered I get.
Yeah, but like,
not enough.
No, but like, if you ask me if I want to play badminton, and there's all these details up in the air, I'm like, oh, like, do I want to take the responsibility and like be like, okay, when are we gonna play, and where are we gonna play, and how are we?
Okay,
like,
you don't have to become a camp counselor when I ask you to play badminton.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't be a camp counselor, but to me, that's what it kind of seems like. Is like I need to be like, okay, let's sort this out, and like to me, I see it as like effort, kind of, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. A lot of improvements in life just come down from putting in more effort.
Yeah,
really, like even the listening one, you could say. You just want to be putting in more effort, trying to be focused and listening. It's a lot of things are effort. I don't know if I don't want to say that and make it sound like it's a bad thing, that it's like, oh, this is just effort. Like maybe I don't even know.
You don't want to oversimplify it, but yet
I don't want to oversimplify it, but
it is simple.
That is kind of what it
respect.
is.
If anyone has any other communication techniques that have worked for them, send us a message. If you think that we missed something on our own critique of ourselves, send us a message.
Send us a roast of each of us.
If you notice anything while we were speaking to each other that we could have done differently to communicate our points better.
Yeah. And I do kind of want to bring up the 5 guys thing, just because I feel like the longer it goes, this was like the perfect one in my mind. I'm like, okay, communication. Yeah. We'll bring it up here.
I feel hesitant given the time. And I wonder if maybe we try to do this is part 1 of communication. Part 2 will come out later this week, and we'll do 5 guys.
Yeah, we could do that. And have Sammy back. Oh, actually, yeah, maybe that'll be a good idea to have Sammy back to moderate, in case things get a little too heated.
This is, you're watching this unrehearsed, us discussing, us having a communication example of when we should talk about 5 guys. This is
one of the biggest
unscripted
communication problems in history, really.
Yeah. Once you guys hear this, you're gonna be in shock.
Yeah, no, it's really gonna be insane. But yeah, okay, we'll do it again. Potentially not next week, but yeah, well, I guess we'll have to save it for another podcast, the story. So
okay. Thank you for
joining
us.
Thanks for joining us. Goodbye.
Bye.